Hi folks, this is a tutorial about William Blake's poem Nurse's Song. This is the experience version because, as many of you will know, there are two poems which have the same name in the collection. I've done the Innocence version in a previous video, so go and have a look at that if you haven't already. This is from a collection published in 1794, the Experience collection, and this video is aimed to give you some of the key concepts for the poem, some key talking points and some key analytical points for those of you who are studying Blake for A-level. So despite this poem being a lot shorter than its Innocence counterpart, this poem is slightly more complex. It's not a lot more complex, but there is a degree of complexity in it that maybe the Innocence version didn't have. Same concept, though, as the Innocence version. We have a nurse who is a guardian. She's looking after the children. And we have the children themselves playing outside. And it's again time to come indoors because it's getting dark. So it's the same kind of concept as the Innocence version. But the relationship between the nurse and the children is different in this poem, as well as the way in which the nurse is characterised. So the nurse is an adult. She is looking at childhood from her perspective, and that creates her cynical and jealous point of view, because when she hears the children playing outside, she believes that it's a waste of time because the freedom of play for children offers little help or purpose in the adult world. And there is a belief that this isn't just the nurse's view, this is a common view which runs down generations. So it's almost cyclical. In other words, all adults have the same repressed freedom. This is a good poem to talk about if you want to talk about the relationships between adults and children, or the presentation of children. And this is a poem that you would use to probably talk about how not all of Blake's poems present a positive relationship between adults and children. So a short poem, only 2 stanzas long. The Innocence version has 4 stanzas, so this is much shorter. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have less to say. So the rhyme scheme is exactly the same as the Innocence one, which again gives that nursery rhyme-like, song-like quality, as is of course the case with the Innocence version. We have the word song in the title, so it's perhaps going to have that song-like quality to it. She begins by saying, when the voices of children, this is the nurse speaking. We don't know if they're actual voices that she can hear or just a memory of them. And again, very similar to the Innocence version, she allegedly hears them on the green, on a piece of green land outside. But we have the word whisperings here, and that is different to the Innocence version. Whisperings perhaps suggests some form of secrecy, some form of deception. It's as if maybe the children are fearful of the nurse, they're trying to escape her in some way, so it's not as harmonious as the Innocence version. And in the last 2 lines there, the nurse says that she remembers her youth, and in so doing, her face actually turns green and pale. So the nurse is remembering her own repressed childhood in the fallen world of experience, again suggesting that the eradication of freedom perhaps runs down generations. It's not just her that feels this, it's all adults, is what the idea is. Again, we've had that word green, and green can be a symbol of nature, which is often in an Innocence poem quite harmonious and positive, but here obviously green has connotations of fever and illness, envy and jealousy. So this is not a nurse that is as happy as she was in the Innocence version. So she actually turns quite feverish, maybe feverish with jealousy at seeing or hearing the children playing. So it's nowhere near as harmonious as the Innocence version. We don't know where the parents are, and if you have read The Chimney Sweeper, the parents are the ones that go up to the church to pray. Maybe that's where they are here, but we don't know where the parents are. And that begs the question again about the relationship between the church, parents and children in this kind of triangle. Where is the dysfunctionality between them? So we don't know where the parents are. In the second stanza, the rhyme scheme continues, and unlike the Innocence poem where the children had a voice, if you remember in the third stanza of the Innocence poem, the children reply back to the nurse. Here the children don't speak at all. So it's nowhere near as democratic as the Innocence version. There's no dialogue between the two parties. So the children remain silent and, in effect, voiceless here. The nurse, like in the Innocence poem, asks the children to come in, but it's slightly more imperative here, it's slightly more commanding. She doesn't give the children as much flexibility to disagree with this. And unlike the nurse in the Innocence version, the nurse here doesn't allow the children to stay outdoors and play, meaning that she imposes constraint and control onto their innocence and their freedom outdoors in nature, which of course doesn't happen in the Innocence poem. So this conflicts with the romantic view of children roaming free in the green world or in the pastoral. Like in the Innocence poem, though, we do have the sun again, showing that the end of the day is coming, that darkness is falling, and the idea again of the transience of time, the transience of the innocent world. And in the last two lines, the nurse's point of view is very clearly established, where she says or she thinks that the children's play is wasted. Very bitter here. She's basically saying that there's no point in children playing out all the time because it's too different to what they can expect when they grow up. So what's the point of it? And if children believe that this is what life is, they're going to be sourly disappointed when they grow up because it's not going to be the same. She believes from her perspective as an adult that her own freedom has to always be hidden, her own desire always has to be hidden and constrained. And the last point, we have reference to winter and night, which we didn't have in the Innocence version, common motifs in Blake, or metaphors in Blake, to represent adulthood and the sense of darkness and the lack of pleasure and joy that comes from such connotations. So it's a short poem, but it's the same concept as the Innocence version, but the relationship between the nurse and the children is different, as is the depiction of the nurse and her relationship, I suppose, with adulthood more generally. In this poem, we do not have a positive, nurturing relationship between children and adults.